This is Akashvani. In the program Spotlight, now we bring a discussion on the significance of environment and climate sustainability meetings under India's G20 Presidency. The participants are C.K. Varshney, environmentalist, and Gaura Dhamanlal, anchor.
India is among the leading nations to have adopted large-scale sustainable development practices. In fact, building resilient and sustainable socio-economic infrastructure that is reducing our carbon footprint even as it is uplifting millions of citizens from poverty is one of them. And we are very clear, as our Prime Minister has repeatedly said, that environment sustainability and economic progress definitely go hand in hand. Against the backdrop of the 4th Environment and Climate Sustainability Working Group and Environment Ministers meet in Chennai, which is 26th-28th of July. Our topic for today is significance of the environment and climate sustainability meetings under India's G20 Presidency. Professor Varshney, could you please give us an overview of the key outcomes of the 4th G20 climate meet in Chennai under India's presidency?
Well, I will only say that this under India's presidency, it is one of the very important meetings which is taking place in Chennai. Earlier, already 3 meetings have taken place. So I think these are the inputs of the past 3 meetings and also identifying the issues as well as possible roadmap to overcome the problems created by climate change and the issues that are needed for at least the preparation that is needed for sustainable economic development and human well-being. Now, this is the most important aspect. Now, G20 is a very fit forum where these issues must be discussed and must be exposed to everyone so that it is a cooperative effort of dealing and maintaining the environmental common, which is most important factor in determining well-being as well as the economic development of the population residing in these not only G20 countries but the world over. I will give you a few examples that how important G20 countries are as a group. You see, the 80% of the global GDP is represented by G20 countries. 75% of international trade is because of the G20 countries. And as well as 60% of the global population lives in G20 countries. And most of the G20 countries represent the global south, where resources are limited, and we need to really manage in a most effective manner the available resources. At the same time, work very hard to really safeguard ourselves from the deadly consequences of climate change. You have already seen that in recent years or in recent days, past days or past months, what kind of flood situation we have faced in the country. And not only that, it is only India we have faced. The same kind of a situation, which is described in the same manner, but it only location varies. Most of the countries are facing. In some of the countries, even the forest fire is becoming very, very difficult to contain. In fact, human beings are at war with forest fire.
Right.
You see the Australian fire, you see in Europe that is what is happening, and so on and so forth. So I'm saying that the climate change is a very important factor which has come because of the luxurious consumption made by the global north. Global north is developed. They are more economically well-off simply because that they have deposited huge amounts of carbon dioxide. Now, this excessive luxury that they have enjoyed has really serious implications in creating survival problem, food shortage or food security problem, water security problem, flooding, drought, as well as the heat wave and crop failure in the developing countries, which have nothing to do with the carbon dioxide emission, which has such an implication in their living and in their day-to-day life and in their economic activity. Now, this kind of a suffering, which is really on the basis of somebody else who has aggressed upon the environmental resources in a very, very rapid manner, in a monopolistic manner, that is the real issue. So I think it requires compensation. It requires the kind of the loss and damages. And for that, I think the global north has to provide assurances, or I should say commitment,
Absolutely, Professor Varshney, because India has repeatedly been reminding them at many international fora that you have a commitment, you have a responsibility, and you need to fulfill them, even if it is providing finance. Taking the context you just spoke earlier of the disruptive consumption patterns of the global north over the years, we often hear about the differences in perspectives among G20 member countries on environmental issues. How does India plan to foster collaboration and consensus among the diverse group of developed and developing nations to drive meaningful action? I mean, another window for Indian diplomacy?
You have raised a very important issue because people have a different situation, the geography changes, and I think issues are different. But the fact of the matter is that the entire global environment is one. It cannot be dissected according to nationality, which unfortunately is different from the economic system. And I think most of the previous meetings and the global management issues are largely, the overriding factor is nationality. And I think the environmental issues transcend those nationality issues. So I think it is a different kind of a management culture that has to come. And if the global south suffers, the global north is going to suffer because most of the things, the supply lines or the supply chains are such that they are provided with the necessary requirement. You see that in the war that is taking place between Ukraine and Russia, I mean, the food that is being distributed, which really Ukraine was supplying, there is a halt in that, and you will find that most of the developing countries are suffering. Not only developing countries, even developed countries are suffering. The food prices have gone up. India has restricted the export of the rice because the global warming issues have created a serious problem for the growth and for the yield of the rice. And I think all these things are affecting not only India but also in the global north. And I can give you the latest example that since the India restricted the export of the rice, there was a great, I should say, hoarding of the rice by the people in developed countries. And now they have said that no, one bag, one family. So you can see that these things are not nationally controlled. These are international. And you cannot have any control on that because this is something beyond the national boundaries, beyond the national policies where the environment operates. And therefore it is important, and G20 is a right forum where these things can be discussed threadbare. The underlying factor is the same, that we have to depend on healthy environment. And what is the healthy environment is that where the carbon dioxide burden is reduced, carbon footprint is reduced, and we really adhere to our commitments that we have made at Paris with respect to the containment or the stopping of the large effluent emission of the carbon dioxide. So I think this is very important to keep the temperature of the globe to 20 degrees and making every effort to bring it down to, on an average, temperature rise of 1.5 degrees from the time that the industrial civilization started. So I think these are the issues which are common to all, and therefore India has come up. At these G20 meetings, 3 have taken place, the 4th one is taking place in Chennai, where we are trying to demonstrate that how we can overcome some of these problems. And one of the brilliant example is that how we have created the Solar Alliance. Now we are creating some more this kind of a proposal where we have shown that how energy transition can take place. So our energy transition is taking place fairly rapidly and it is really getting accelerated. And this is what we want to demonstrate, that people can have freedom from importing and therefore saving their precious resources and thus deploying it for more sustainable economic development of their people, of their country. And I think these are very practical examples. Right. This has been achieved. We have not received any foreign assistance for that in big manner. But I think that there is a time that issues of the foreign assistance and money that the country should provide to really upgrade and to make them resilient is absolutely essential. And some of these issues are going to be discussed. And also a pitch will be made as to how the collective thinking will be presented at the forthcoming COP meeting 28, which is going to take place somewhere in November or December this year.
Wanting to draw your attention now, Professor Varshney, India clearly has a specific vision of how we think of promoting sustainability, and in this meet the delegates are working on developing 9 ocean-based sustainability principles, which are likely to be adopted by the G20 ministers on Friday. Could you please share its significance?
I think this is very important that most of the G20 countries have a very promising blue economy. If taken care properly, I think this can improve on many fronts. And I can give you few items very clearly. For example, it can reduce the global warming to a very great extent because we can have offshore wind turbines, we can have floating solar panels, and thus we will not have the need to import large amounts of fossil fuel, or at least our need for importing fossil fuel will go down to the extent we develop these offshore resources along our coast. This is number one. Number two, that since we are not going to emit carbon dioxide, so I think this is something to which what we have contributed or committed at the Paris meeting, we are going to really make our commitment work more significantly, or at least it will contribute towards that meeting those commitments. And the third and fourth thing is that most of the mangroves are highly productive systems of the world. They produce on a per unit area basis, if we compare with the best forest and the mangrove, then mangroves are 5 to 6 times more productive. And not only productive, they have such a diversity of resources to feed and to sustain the coastal communities as well as other communities in a big way. For example, fisheries resources and the kelp resources and the algae that they grow. And many times these algae are eaten also by large populations. For example, in Japan and Indonesia and many other places, even in our own country. Some of these aquatic algae are edible and they really contribute. So I think all this is, and then more than that, we can have large amount of aquaculture of prawns and mussels and so on. So they are export crop as well as for domestic consumption. So I think it directly contributes to the food security. It also contributes to the water security. The more food that you are able to produce, the less amount of fresh water is required to be irrigated on our land. Because if the food is to be met through the aquaculture, through the salt water or through the marine water, then I think we are saving water on that.
It's very interesting, Professor Varshney, that you mention also the mangrove forests, because we're also celebrating the International Day for the Conservation of Mangrove Ecosystem. And, wanting to quickly draw your attention, if you could briefly talk about some legacy issues. What do you think India hopes to leave behind in the field of environmental sustainability once its G20 presidency is over?
I think the most important thing will be discussed on the basis of the alignment that is taking place through these 4 meetings. And the final meeting is going to take place on 28th, where ministers will be meeting. And that will be the termination of the environment issue under G20 under the Indian presidency. And it is here that the alliances will be made in terms of sharing the experience from one country. And I think this will become available to all partners, where also there will be cooperative systems are likely to be evolved, where one country who has developed or who has mastered something can really share that. For example, we have a large amount of success in terms of gobar gas plants. We have got a great success in terms of aquaculture, and we have got a great success in terms of really managing our ports and shipping yards, where we have done huge amount of work in reducing carbon dioxide emission through energy efficiency. And we have also been successful in offshore energy generation. And at the same time, with respect to 2-3 things, I think India is going to demonstrate that how we can have these fuel, that is, we can generate methane, and from that the green hydrogen we can produce, or how green hydrogen can be helpful in really replacing the fossil fuel and reducing carbon dioxide emission. It is a path. Here actually we are meeting. It is only the concept which are going to be clarified. It is only the strategies which are going to be made. It is only here that the policies are going to be evolved on that. And I think this is one of the very important factor where India is going to contribute in a big way.
Professor Varshney, thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on the significance of environment and climate sustainability meetings under India's G20 presidency. The participants were C.K. Varshney, environmentalist, and Gaura Dhawanlal, anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official.